I have a guest today, a longtime friend. We were just sort of discussing, how did we ever meet? We don't remember. We think it might have been through Jim Fletcher, a great Bible teacher and supporter of Israel. So I'm welcoming Brian Schrauger. Brian, welcome to our Israel update.
Thank you, John.
So why don't you just, I was sort of joking around with you, is why don't you just tell people why I might be interested in talking to you? What do you have to bring to this whole conversation about Israel?
I've actually lived here. It's hard to believe, but I've lived here now for almost 13 years. And that's a miracle in and of itself. And I have spent a lot of time while here in Bethlehem, in greater Bethlehem. So I have, and in fact, I covered 3 or 4 Christ at the Checkpoint conferences. Christ at the Checkpoint is a conference put on by Bethlehem Bible College every 2 years. It started in 2010, and in short, it has Christianized the anti-Israel Palestinian narrative. And the guy leading that conference today is a guy named Munther Isaac, Dr. Munther Isaac, who is the pastor of the Bethlehem Lutheran Christmas Church, something like that. And so, yeah, I mean, I've become acquainted with a number of the leading English writing journalists in Israel. And I think that just living here has given a perspective that no one else could otherwise have, unless they too are living here.
Well, I can't remember the last time we did a conversation. I think it might have been one of those, hey, let's do this while the rockets are still flying over Israel.
I remember doing that with you. In fact, I think as soon as we finished, or even while we were talking, it was perhaps April 12, 13, we were talking, and the missiles from Iran began to explode off my porch. I mean, they were intercepted. So, yeah, I forgot about that. You're right. That was very dramatic.
Well, what's it been like living under that for the last 400 some days now, with the Hezbollah rockets, particularly in the north, but they also reach fairly far south. The Gaza rockets that went on for weeks and weeks and weeks after October 7th. Hezbollah for over a year, started on the day after October 7th when Gaza invaded Israel. And by the way, I don't like calling that a terrorist attack. I think it was an invasion. You know, I think we need to kind of get the narrative right on that. And then, of course, you've had the Iranian couple missile attacks, well, missile drone, and then a large ballistic missile attack. You've had the Houthis.
Right.
And every now and then, you know, and I have this Red Alert app on my phone, and I had to turn it off some because it was draining the battery on my phone because it went off all the time. Yeah. And I'm thinking, like, when I look at it and I see like a sea of red points, alert points, all across Israel sometimes, it's like, so what happens when there's a red alert? What do you do? What's your first reaction?
My first reaction is something along the lines of, oh, phooey, to put it kindly.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, unless there is an alarm in the exact area where one lives, there isn't anything to do. It's only when the alarm goes off where you are located or where you live that you must go to a shelter. In the early days after October 7, a lot of rockets were coming out of Gaza. Most of them were coming from there. And some of them did reach Jerusalem. There were alarms here. In fact, on October 7, 2023, there were some that actually came over Jerusalem. And at the time, however, I was up north in Katzrin, which is in the Golan Heights, and a very nice bedroom community. And I woke up early before everyone else in the house, and it was Shabbat, and my companions in the house all keep Shabbat. I went outside, and suddenly my phone began to vibrate, and that's when I saw all of these rockets being hurled at Israel. And I went and woke everyone up. I said, we are under attack. We're at war. And at first they thought, oh, this happens all the time. But then they looked at it, and this Torah observant, Shabbat observant household, they were on their phones all day, which is a big deal, right?
Right.
So what happens? Well, you wait, and if the alarm goes off in the city where you're at, it's a very loud alarm. Every home built in the last, 15, 20 years is required to have a bomb shelter room, a reinforced room into which you can go. If you're in an older building or in a public place, there are always signs. If you go to IKEA, when you first walk in, and as you walk around the vast warehouse store, there are always signs saying this way to a bomb shelter. So
by the way, I've been to Machpelah, I've been to Mamre, and there's an IKEA less than 10 minutes from my house I've never been to. I've never been to one yet. So I'm I'm part of the IKEA resistance.
Well, I don't blame you. It's not, the style doesn't especially appeal to me, but it's very popular here.
It is here too.
And they have wonderful meatballs.
Well, maybe I'll go for the meatballs sometimes.
Really, it's worth going just for the meal. I mean, get the meatballs and green beans. Oh, that's really, really, really good stuff.
Anyway, so back to what was going on October 7th.
Yeah. So in the aftermath, I remember we were going to drive from Katzrin to Jerusalem that night. We decided to wait till Sunday because it didn't appear safe. We drove, and what happened on the way down was it was very quiet. We were very fortunate. We hit a window of no rockets. But throughout the last 14, 15 months, now and then later with rockets coming from Hezbollah, driving up to Katzrin or anywhere up north always meant having your red alert app on, so that if it went off while you were driving along with everybody else, you would pull over to the side of the road, get out of your car, go to the nearest ditch or underpass, cover your head and lay down, right? This is what people had to do. And a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, I went to visit a lovely couple I met maybe 2.5 years ago in Moldova, where I was there to witness Ukrainian Jewish people coming to make immigration, to make Aliyah to Israel. And this couple was part of that group, but they weren't from Ukraine. They were actually from Russia. And I was very intrigued with their story. So they've been here now 2.5 years, and I've been in touch just by social media, but I went up for the wife's birthday party, and that was in Akko. Akko is a city kind of close, just north of Haifa. Akko in English is spelled A-C-R-E, but in Hebrew, and everyone here calls it Akko. You don't call it acre or Akra. It's Akko. So anyway, that's where I went for that birthday party, and they've been living under the rockets from Hezbollah every day for the last, however many months it's been. And they have a bomb shelter in their home, a reinforced room. And we were celebrating having a barbecue on their porch and with maybe 15, 20 other people. And sure enough, alarm went off. We all went into the bomb shelter room, which was their bedroom. And the children came along. They continued like, oh yeah, and they played their games. But and it went off, and everyone kind of took it as a matter of course. But that's a bit deceptive, because in fact, living under this has been an active trauma, and really everyone in Israel has been affected by it, even if they've not been directly under the Hezbollah rockets. It's not just the rockets. It's a small country, so you know people who are there. You have friends and family members who are where the rockets are falling. You have friends and family members who are in the IDF, who are serving in Gaza, who were in Gaza, or who were in Lebanon fighting Hezbollah. And a lot of the people going in to fight now have been reservists, and these are people in their upper 30s and 40s and even 50s going in to fight, leaving their jobs, leaving their livelihood, and going to fight for a period of usually 2-3 months, leaving their families behind. A very good friend of mine, one of her brothers is about to go in for the third time, and he's in his he's like 39 years old, and he's an executive, and he's going in to serve with the IDF for the third time. He'll be going in February, unless something changes with the current situation, and he won't have to. We hope that's the case. All that to say is, if you're not directly in the line of fire, you know somebody who is, and you know somebody whose son, daughter, father, sister, mother, parent was either taken captive by Hezbollah, by Hamas, in Gaza. You know somebody, or you know somebody whose son or daughter was killed in the IDF. You certainly know somebody who's been injured, been thousands of injuries, and the atmosphere. What that leads to in Israel is a feeling of a family. In the U.S. and in a big country, I think you read about a casualty or a problem, and it's easy to depersonalize it because you don't really know anybody who knows that person. They're an unknown person. That's not the case here. Here, people who are held captive are regarded as family members, as sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, spouses, and there is immense heartache, and that. Everyone does their best to continue on with life, but there is no doubt that the trauma is very real here. It's very common, and people have trouble sleeping. Right? You wake up at 2 a.m. and you can't go back to sleep, and you stay up to like 4, and finally try to go back to sleep, or you can't. There's trouble concentrating at work, focusing on the job at hand. Those Israelis are very good at continuing on with life when things are difficult, but this has been hard for everyone here. So, anyway, that's
yeah, I mean, and you mentioned you go up to Katsrin, by the way. If tourism really ever opens up again to Israel, I'd highly recommend the archaeological park at Katsrin.
Yeah, it's
a very, very good example. I mean, I think it's based on homes built around 200, 300 AD. Right. But the technology of home building didn't change much from the time of Jesus in the Second Temple period to 200 or 300 AD. It was pretty much the same. So you'll get a very, very good picture. I think probably the best picture of how people lived in biblical times in Israel.
In fact, I was exploring in Katsrin the week before October 7 attack, and I found, just walking in the fields just south of Katsrin, 2 ancient abandoned communities that are thousands of years old. And you just walk right into them. It's really an amazing place. One of them was a Jewish community, the other had been Jewish, and others had lived there over the years. But there were arches in place, buildings. There was a big earthquake back in, I don't remember what year it was, that knocked down a lot of these buildings, but those ruins they're all still there. It's quite a place.
It's amazing. And that's the interesting thing about Israel. We talk about archaeology. I know you and we went to Mamre in Hebron when we were down there. That was almost exactly 2 years ago, right. Just the other day, because you were posting some pictures about it, I think, on Facebook. And we've gone over to the Knesset with the Christian Media Summit, and It was a great time. But they've uncovered so little of the archaeology record in Israel. I mean, maybe 1% at most. Yeah. Which means that, this narrative, and maybe that's okay. Now we can go here, but I want to ask you this question first. I know you've been down to the Gaza border on a number of occasions. I know you've gone down there to help volunteer to harvest, tomatoes or something like that.
Yeah.
Because
and one time, what else? Blueberries. That was a surprise.
Okay. And and a lot of people don't understand sort of the geography of Israel. So at the Media Summit, we went, I don't think you went with us that day, but we went down to Gaza. Right. And we went to the base down there, and we went to a few of the kibbutzim there along the Gaza border, near them. And I can't remember the other one where we had lunch. And it was very interesting, because the the people that spoke to us, I've seen her she's come to the U.S. on Fox. She survived the attacks from Niram, one of the top people in the community there. And she was talking about, that this is 95% heaven and 5% hell to live here along the Gaza border, and it's beautiful pastoral fields, these kibbutzim, these are sort of, I would call them, I know it sounds derogatory to say it, but they sort of remind me of the communal living hippies here in the United States. Right. Peace loving, they like to share everything. And it's a very, it is communal living on a scale that I don't think us here in the United States we understand. But she said, look, when a rocket goes off in Gaza, we have 10 seconds to get to a shelter. So as you go further from Gaza, there was more and more time that people would have. I think you're probably a minute and a half in the Jerusalem area from the Gaza rockets once they're launched. But
I think shorter, but I don't remember. I think
okay.
Because actually, it's interesting. We can hear Israel bombing in Gaza here in Jerusalem.
Wow.
We hear the bombing because it's only about 50, 60 kilometers as the crow flies. And Jerusalem is on an elevated plain, right? Or mountains. And so the sound carries and we'll hear boom, boom, boom. And the windows will even rattle sometimes. It's coming from Gaza.
So you've been down to Gaza post October 7th. Just tell us a little bit about what that was like for you going through some of those kibbutzim that were attacked.
Well, I didn't go into the kibbutzim. When I went down, and the only time I was 3 times to help farmers harvest their crops, which is a big, big help. And people have come from around the world to do this, and a lot of Israelis were doing it at the time. This was also in the days, though, when the military activity in Gaza was very, very active. One day we drove down and we arrived at the site where we were going to pick, I think it was tomatoes, and we got out of the car and there were rockets flying overhead. They were right above us, and then they were being intercepted by Iron Dome or some sort of system. And I tended to want to gaze up, and I was being told, no, get under the tree, because debris can fall, and people have been killed from debris. From these stuff. So anyway, the most shocking thing in going down to that area was realizing how far the terrorists got. You can read about it, but when you actually go down there and see the miles and tens and 20s, miles and miles and miles where they managed to get inside Israel without any obstruction, is really, really shocking. And you realize, they were here? They got this far? And they did.
Yeah, I think some made it almost all the way to Beersheba, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, they're very, very close. So yeah, they had an open, unobstructed invasion area for about the first 12 hours at least.
Now, I'm sure living in Israel, you've noticed that there's a bit of political turmoil in the. I often say,
that's always the case.
Yeah, I often, we've had that too here in the United States, but I'm like, at least you're not Israel. I mean, if you want to see, because we were over at the Knesset 2 years ago when they were forming the government. The government had not yet been formed yet. The Knesset was meeting, but the Netanyahu had not been established yet as the new replacement prime minister. I'd like sort of just give me the feeling of what you observe with how people feel about the hostage situation and what's going on in Gaza.
Well, the hostage situation is everybody's issue here. There's no left, right, middle, center. It's a universal issue. You will have some, you will have some extreme voices saying, no, we shouldn't try to get the hostages out until we absolutely, totally defeat Hamas and Hezbollah. But that's not mainstream at all. The mainstream view, the vast majority here, 70 plus 80% desperately want to see those hostages released. So that's not really a political issue. Of course, everything's a political issue here, but it isn't one that is characterized by one side or the other, or one political party or one political movement or another.
Okay. So is there going to be a deal soon, do you think, to get the hostages out?
Please, God, let it be. I hope so. I pray and hope and pray it so. The problem all along has been that there was no reason for Hamas to give up these people. It's the one thing they had to keep Israel in check. And unless they are convinced they're defeated, the feeling was, and in fact, they kept saying, "Oh, we'll do it." They would get a deal, and they back off. They have reasons why they wouldn't do it. They would change their mind, but say, "No, Israel changed their mind." They weren't going to let those hostages go. With Hamas being so severely crippled, and with Hezbollah being in retreat, basically disabled in the north, which was, of course, reinforcing the Hamas narrative. And then now with Bashar Assad being overthrown, these things have created an environment in which, more than ever before, Hamas is totally isolated. It doesn't have reinforcements. And so it doesn't have Hezbollah, it doesn't have Syria, or the arms that could come to Hamas through Syria, through Lebanon, and then down to Gaza. So they've been left alone, and there's hope that this means a hostage deal will come. And so you see the same reports I do every day saying, well, here's what's happening. It looks good. I hope it happens.
Okay, I want to go. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about Syria before we finish up here. Okay. But I want to talk a little bit about sort of a thing I think that's near and dear to your heart. Yeah. And the narrative that's grown up, and you're familiar with it. And this came up again recently with regard to this particular image that came out of the Vatican recently. I believe it's been, I've heard it's been removed, but I just found it a few minutes ago and copied it and put it here. This is the Pope in the Vatican in the Pope Paul VI pavilion, or whatever it is they have there. Tell them what it is in the picture.
Obviously a creche made of olive wood, carved in Bethlehem, designed and made in Bethlehem. And the big deal is you see the baby Jesus there on a keffiyeh, which is a headdress that identifies the wearer as a Palestinian and pro-Palestinian. And so obviously the idea is that baby Jesus is the suffering of Palestinians is the same thing, is the suffering into which Jesus was born and being born. All of this comes out of something called liberation theology, but I'll let you ask.
Okay. Well, yeah, so this may have been the first time I knew of you, because I follow this, and you wrote an article back in May of 2014, over 10 years ago. I can't believe it's been that long.
Yeah.
Talking about identity theft in Bethlehem. I want you to talk about that in a moment, but on the right is a post that you sent me from a guy named Munther Isaac.
Right.
And if we've talked beforehand about him, tell him who Munther Isaac is, or just remind him who Munther Isaac is.
Munther Isaac is now the head of the Crisis at Checkpoint Anti-Israel Conference, which has Christianized the anti-Israel Palestinian narrative and has been pointed directly at evangelicals. What you're seeing here is a portrayal, a picture of the creche in Munther Isaac's church. It was first put up a year ago, and it gained Munther international recognition. He was in Washington, D.C. He was in London visiting Marcus Welby, the head of the Anglican Church. He was everywhere. And it's because of that global recognition that he even got on shows like what's his name?
Tucker Carlson.
Tucker Carlson's program, right. So it gained him a lot of credibility.
And by the way, if I did an interview, there was a co-authored article at Tablet, and I know one of the authors is a guy named Dumasani Washington.
All right.
Who did an article at Tablet Magazine. I'll put a link to that in the show notes here. Yeah. And I interviewed Dumasani back in, I think, April of this year about Tucker Carlson's interview with Munther Isaac. And you saw it. I mean, what was your reaction to that interview?
Sickening. It was just sickening. I mean, Tucker gave him an open platform and never challenged him on anything. And there was no excuse for it, unless Tucker has actually gone and embraced that narrative. And there are indications that perhaps he has. So it's very, very disturbing, because he has a significant voice in the upcoming presidential administration.
In fact, I think he was claiming yesterday that he was responsible for Mike Pompeo not being in the new administration of Donald Trump.
You know, the rumors, we both read the rumors that he's had a lot of input, and his voice has been significant in choices that Trump is making.
And then the interview that he just did 2 days ago, a day or two ago, with a guy named Jeffrey Sachs, who is a radical leftist, anti-American, anti-Israel, Jew-hating, pro-China, pro-communist, wants to see America disappear guy. And it was, I will tell you, Brian, I don't know if you've seen that interview, but the head nodding and fawning of Tucker to Jeffrey Sachs in that interview, in the world of what I would call anti-Semitism, on the tree of anti-Semitism, Jeffrey Sachs is about as low-hanging fruit as you can get.
Wow.
I mean, and it is shocking to me, but I've had conversations with other people about Tucker, and the problem is you'll see a guy like Tucker, and you might agree with 80%, 90% of what he might stand for, but then there's this 10% carve out that's just so despicable and so troubling. So you wrote this article, Identity Theft in Bethlehem, and I want to remind people what else happened. This was the Pope on that trip in May of 2014, meeting with the Hajj, and I don't know if this guy's still around, but the guy's the Muslim authority over the Temple Mount.
Right.
And then here was the Pope in Manger Square there in Bethlehem.
Yeah, I was there.
Okay. Yeah. And there again, what do we see? We see the baby Jesus in the Palestinian keffiyeh.
Right.
But we also see Joseph
in it, right?
In a Palestinian keffiyeh. And the three wise men are three recent popes prior to Francis: Benedict, Pope John Paul II, and Pope Paul VI. And then the nuns and other Mary and everybody, it looks like they're in a burqa. But
part of the argument I was making in that article about identity theft is, as you can see in this picture, there is nothing Jewish about Jesus, his parents, or the context in which he was born. All traces, all expressions, and any evidence of his Jewishness has been completely erased. And in that square, at the same time, all around, it's an open square, and there are buildings, and up on the buildings all around were depictions of classical art showing the crucifixion of Jesus and various parts of his suffering.
Here, I think there are actually a couple of those in your article.
Yes, and you can see that they are then
like, for example, the one here, the Madonna the separation barrier, which is not a wall everywhere. It's a wall to prevent sniper fire. But
in most places it's a fence, but in some places it's a wall where there needs to be more security. But nonetheless, here you see the Madonna, Mary, and I don't know who, Jesus, and who else is down there? Who's the other child? I'm not sure, John maybe. But it's merged with this image of the wall, and it deliberately portrays Bethlehem as being entirely behind the wall, unable to, they're totally trapped, which is not true.
And then this other poster, which is the Jesus being taken down from the cross, and right. they put the image up. They merge it with, a Palestinian being drug away.
Right, and that's what they did all around the square. And so it was a deliberate hijack, an explicit hijack of the gospel and of the gospel message. And what I found especially disturbing and wrote about in this article was that Pope Paul implicitly endorsed it. He didn't say where there was not a single word about it.
You mean Pope Francis?
Pope Francis.
Well, he even did. I think I have a picture of him. Yeah. He did the obligatory. Carolyn Glick wrote about it as well. Well, I don't see it here, so I'll have to find it. But be that as it may, it's so. Tell us what happened after you wrote the article.
So I wrote the article, and at the time I was living in a hotel in Bet Jala, which is the hotel is almost on the border with Bethlehem. Greater Bethlehem is made up of three communities: Bet Sahur, Shepherd's Field, Bethlehem, and Bet Jala. And collectively, they are Greater Bethlehem. So at the time I was living in a hotel in Bet Jala, right on the border of Bethlehem. And I don't know, it was some weeks after this, after the article had been published, I was summoned down to the lobby of the hotel, and where I encountered Palestinian Authority police. And they said, "Are you Brian Schrauger?" "Yeah." "We want to talk to you." I said, "Well, fine, we've got a nice big lobby here. Let's sit down and talk." "No, you need to come with us into police headquarters." And it was quite a scene. There were probably 6 or 7 of them. And they put me in an unmarked car. They took my passport, put me in the backseat of the car, drove me to a walled police compound. And by the way, as all this is happening, I'm texting people saying, "This is going on," just so you know. The PA has picked me up. And they took me they drove into the police headquarters. And as we were getting out of the car, the man who was my interrogator, because he spoke English, named, I think it was Mahmoud, maybe, I can't remember. He said, "You're here because of the things you write." So clearly they had spent some time, perhaps the night before, reading articles, including this one about identity theft in Bethlehem. And they took me into a room with a badly chipped up large wooden desk, and behind it sat a guy with stained teeth, smoking a cigarette. It was like something out of a Humphrey Bogart movie.
Yeah, like Casablanca or something.
Yeah, it was. It was, and in Arabic, he asked me if I spoke Arabic. I knew what he was asking. I said, "No, only English." And so this guy who interrogated me was Usama. So Usama said, "Oh, you need to give me your phone." I had no choice, so I gave him my phone. He's looking at my phone. "Who you been texting?" And "Who's this person?" I said, "It's a friend in Efrat." "Oh, maybe you can go stay with that friend in Efrat." And then they put me into another room, kept my phone, put me into another room with someone watching me. And I was there for 15, 20 minutes praying. And they brought me back and they said, "Oh, you're very prejudiced about the things you write. I mean, very one-sided." I said, "It's opinion." I wrote, it said, anyone can write an opinion. So you want a different opinion, send in a different opinion. And then they told me, well, it went on that way for a while. They said, there are a lot of people complaining about you. I said, really? Because I got along quite well. We're living among Christian Palestinians in Bet Jala and kept a low profile. I enjoyed the people there. I said, who? Well, in today's world, or even in that world, you would think, well, it would have been Islamic extremists that are complaining, but it wasn't. It was fellow Christians, Christ at the Checkpoint Christians, who had turned me in, reported me to the Palestinian Authority, police, and had me hauled in and warned that my life was at risk if I stayed. So that's basically what they told me. So we can't make you leave. Everybody knows you're here. And they made it clear that Israel knew I was there and the U.S. Embassy knew I was there. That was a good thing. I'm sure that protected me. But they said, you should leave. And so I thought they were going to drive me back to the hotel. Instead, they took me to the front gate and said, walk. you know how to get there, right? So I walked back up to the hotel, 20-minute walk or so, and thought about it and prayed about it and talked to some people, and everybody said, yeah, you should get out. And so I did. That day, I went to Efrat, and in fact, the man I was texting put me up in his home for a couple of days. It was quite an experience. In the aftermath of that, Dexter Van Zyl, a friend I had made at Christ at the Checkpoint, he was a journalist there reporting on it for an organization called Camera. And Dexter's a great guy.
Yeah, he's now with Middle East Forum, I believe.
Right. He's one of the smartest people I have.
He is brilliant guy.
Really brilliant. In fact, this is an aside. Dexter is coming home today or tomorrow from, I think, 2 weeks in England, where he has been on a tour of mosques in England. So he's
that's not on my bucket list.
No, he's had some very, very interesting and dangerous encounters.
Wow.
We'll be hearing about them soon. Any case, Dexter wrote an article about what happened. He contacted me right away. We were friends, and he wrote a report about it, which, looking back now 10 years later, is actually very nicely written. He wrote it for the Times of Israel. And then a few days later, I wrote my own account of what happened in the Jerusalem Post. So, by the way, and that really, that's kind of out of order, because one thing my interrogator said to me, he said sarcastically, well, now you've got something else to write about. And I thought to myself, that's true.
You hadn't thought about it, but.
And I did write about it. Dexter wrote about it. And so, yeah, very interesting times.
So this narrative, so Christians who are aware of it, I've been to a Christ at the Checkpoint conference here in the U.S., as you know, and I remember speaking to a guy from Gaza who's a cancer surgeon in Toronto. He was the featured speaker. I don't know if I ever told you this, but I go to dinner and there's only one chair open. So I sit down, and then this guy comes and sits down next to me, and it's this Palestinian Arab cancer surgeon who lives in Toronto, and he's the featured speaker for the evening. So there are a couple of Munther Isaac wannabes sitting across the table with me.
Right.
The two males, they're clearly a couple. They're pastors, I think, from a church in Colorado, both wearing Palestinian keffiyehs. So I started asking the surgeon some questions. I'm like, I've been around Israel. I've been over in Jordan. And I was up in Nablus when I went to Shem, and I saw this balata, a giant refugee. They call it a refugee camp. It's like a giant apartment complex.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's been there for 70 years.
Yeah.
It's right. It's like the refugee status is the only thing that in the Middle East you can inherit, maybe vast wealth and refugee status.
Right.
Even though you've never been a refugee, it's a whole scam. But I asked him, I said, I saw the refugee camps, and my understanding, asking people around Nablus, they've been there for 70 years. And I'm like, but next door there are nice apartment buildings and everything. Why are those people still living there? It's the occupation. He said it's the occupation. I said, well, that's interesting, because I went over to Jordan and I saw refugee camps there.
Even worse.
Right. That's squalor over there.
Right. Exactly.
And I said, so.
And in Syria, it was absolute squalor.
Right. And I talked about the Yarmouk refugee camp in Damascus, not too far from the center of Damascus.
Right.
Just a literal hellhole.
Right.
And he said, well, that's because of the occupation. And so it became clear that there was nothing rational in anything that he thought. Very bright guy. He claimed that it was, it was widely reported I think 3 of his daughters and a niece had been killed in an explosion in Gaza. But, the interesting thing is nobody knows whether it was from an Israeli attack or whether it was just a Hamas rocket that didn't make it very far.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Which happens all the time.
Yeah. 25% of the rockets land on their own people in their own land.
But by the way, this is completely aside. So I was doing a little research today. I saw, you see these posts on social media and you got to check them out. So I saw the post. I haven't been able to verify it, but that the population of Gaza actually increased by 1 or 2% since October 7th. And I guess my point to that is, if it's a genocide,
right.
Israel's not very effective or good at it. Yeah. And then I looked up the CIA World Fact Book. I looked up the death rate per 1,000. Israel is like 60th in the world among countries. The Gaza Strip, at least in 2024, ranks 225 out of like 230.
Wow.
Now, I'll have to unpack that a little bit more, but it's a narrative. So we could go on and on about this. I want to ask you a little bit about sort of the current state of war in the Middle East. And you and I text back and forth all the time. Describe what you think. You spend a lot of time up in the Golan. What's happened? What happened in Syria, and where does that rank? I mean, if you're giving it a scale on the earthquake Richter scale, how would you describe it?
Well, vis-a-vis Iran and what it was doing to encircle Israel with its proxies, it's someone else has said this. It's like the fall of the Berlin Wall. On the Richter scale, I don't know. It's up there. It's not low. It actually really shook things up significantly, and we're still seeing aftershocks and the effects of all of that. I think it's actually a miracle what happened. What has happened over the last year since October 7th, when Israel was horribly invaded, when so many Jewish Israelis were slaughtered. God has answered prayer. He's come to the defense of his people. They have, at some significant cost, fought back in Gaza against Hamas. Then the operation that they began against Hezbollah, especially when the walkie-talkies exploded. I think that was back in late July, maybe sometime in August.
It's actually in September.
Was it that late? It's hard to believe.
Yeah, it's only been 3 months ago.
Hard to believe.
I'm pretty sure that's correct. Yeah.
Time is so strange here because, I've heard you say often, something that happened a week ago seems like months ago. But anyway, with that, and then with the death of Nasrallah, and basically all the leadership was taken out because the people who had the walkie-talkies and the pagers that exploded, they were intermediate leaders, and so they also became all identified. They all had either their hands wounded or their or they were singing soprano because they kept the pagers in their pockets.
Yeah. There's an interesting tweet from the Ayatollah Khamenei. By the way, I recommend people follow him. He's always talking, the incredible success Israel's had in northern Israel, or in southern Lebanon against Hezbollah. You've interviewed people from Alma, and I've interviewed people from Alma and Miri Eisen and other experts. And when this all started, everybody was concerned that an Israeli operation up there was going to result in the death of thousands of Israelis and thousands of IDF. And I think the IDF has lost, 50 soldiers? I mean, and each one of those is very bad. But they've lost just 50 soldiers in this. They've completely dismantled Hezbollah.
Right, and nobody was captured. No hostages were taken. That was a huge thing.
And they found
there would be no hostages.
They found Hezbollah battle plans, though, that.
Oh, yeah.
I think the goal originally was that Hamas and Hezbollah would both invade at the same time, and they would meet in Tel Aviv.
Right. And
they were talking about casualties and hostages of 1 million Israelis.
Exactly. Yeah.
That would have been a 10 on the Richter scale. But so Israel does well. They do this amazing air attack on Iran at the end of, I think that was the end of October.
October 26, maybe something.
Okay, yeah.
I think it was 26 October.
Yeah, 120 fighter jets go over, 120 fighter jets return undamaged. They take out all the Syrian, at least the relevant Syrian, Iraqi, and Iranian air defenses.
Right.
And they essentially, what was the statement? Somebody said the Ayatollah has no clothes.
Right. They took down also at least one facility that
at Parchin.
It was used or would be used to assemble nuclear weapons, and so it destroyed that capability.
So, do you think there's a connection between Israel sort of dismantling Hamas, dismantling Hezbollah, dismantling Iranian air defenses, and then what happened in Syria?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And not only was Syria left abandoned by Hezbollah because of what Israel did, and not only was its support from Iran dramatically weakened and reduced, but its other supporter, Russia, was so preoccupied with what's going on in Ukraine that it lost all of its support. It became completely vulnerable. And the way it looks to me is this rebel organization HTS, led by Mohammed al-Julani. It looks like they were equipped to do this for over a year, funded and given intelligence from Turkey. And so even today, Erdogan is talking about much of Syria becoming part of Turkey. He's already talking about his dream of the Ottoman Empire expanding into Syria through his sponsorship, his proxy of HTS. So if Iran is out of the picture, Turkey is moving in, and it is ready and willing to pursue its dream of a resurrected Ottoman Empire that does not include Israel.
So, and there have been maps, and I've talked a lot about that on my updates, but in the map that I have up here, which is Syria, the yellow area in the northeast of Syria is the, I guess, Kurdish controlled
right
region. And it's very difficult. I mean, we put up a map. This comes from a thing called Live UA Map.
Right.
And they do a very good job of documenting Ukraine and Lebanon and Gaza and all the different control maps, and everybody uses them as a resource. And so we put up here's the yellow, that's the Kurdish, and then the green is the HTS, but it's really overly simplified because this is a tribal area with all sorts of little tribal groups and alliances between ISIS types and Al Qaeda types and that type of thing. So I'm going to ask you about the Kurds, because I know that's something that's near and dear to your heart. You've been up there to Idlib in Iraq. I don't know if you made it down to Mosul or not.
I made it all the way over to Duhok and Zakko, Zakko is right on the border. I spent the night in Zakko in a hotel there. There were a lot of oil workers that were working in Syria, Kurdish Syria, who were living in Zakko, something like that. So yes, I encountered them quite a bit, and it's an interesting situation. These Kurds in northwest Syria, northern Syria, are regarded as mortal enemies by Erdogan in Turkey. And in 2019, Erdogan made it very clear, announced he wanted to have a security buffer zone inside Syria, and he was going to ethnically cleanse this buffer zone of Kurds living there.
So if you look here on the map, you see a green area, but then you see sort of a grayish area. That's the Turkey buffer zone. And Turkey's expanded this somewhat, but they also work with groups in the green as well. And they're pushing back the Kurds. The border here of along the yellow area, that's the Euphrates River.
Right, and that's a natural barrier between the Kurds that at least HTS has not yet gone after. The sickening thing to U.S. soldiers who served in Syria, working with the Kurds there, were U.S. allies in the fight against ISIS. In fact, they did all the hard, dirty work. And then when Erdogan decided he wanted to build a buffer zone and ethnically cleanse that buffer zone of Kurds, the U.S. said, okay. Now, today, if you zoom back into that gray area to the left where it's yellow up to the border with Turkey.
Yeah.
Just today on that border.
In this area here between the two gray areas.
Up in the north in Turkey, troops are amassing. They've huge troops. There's been a huge buildup of troops, and they're there right now. And the U.S. and everyone.
You mean the Turkish troops are amassing? Yes,
right. The Turkish troops have amassed on that border right there, poised, it appears, to go into Syria. It's a virtual certainty that they will do this if they have not already done it, even as we're speaking. And
the word I've seen, Brian, is that, over the past couple of months, or maybe even shorter period of time than that, when I say a couple of months, I would mean in like normal human time, not Middle East time today, where things seem to happen. What was the old saying of Lenin, that there are decades when weeks happen, and then there are weeks when decades happen? And I think we've been in a situation where in the last 2 weeks, decades have happened, things that'll reverberate.
Absolutely, yeah.
If the Lord tarries for decades. I mean, this is just the beginning. Yeah. But that Erdogan has been taking out the Kurds. I mean, I read pretty good intel that Turkey has conducted 5,000 bombing runs into the Kurdish areas over the past couple of months.
I know they've done a lot, certainly since 2019, when they were given the green light by the U.S. to go in. I've not seen those reports. I don't doubt them, however. I had contact with someone I've met on social media who was fighting and going in and as kind of a freelance soldier helping the Kurds. And he saw atrocities happen all the time. One of his own people was killed by a bomb, by a rocket bomb, shot by Turkey. So in any case, the situation of the Kurds is serious in Syria. And what makes this important to Israel is that the Kurds are really, I think the Kurds are Israel's closest allies in the Middle East. The Kurds, I don't think most people can picture it, but they actually, their homeland is a vast area of land. It encompasses what you see in that yellow area, even further over into the green in the northern part of Syria, all of northern Iraq, and then into eastern part of Turkey. Now it's called Turkey. Part of Turkey on the eastern zone there, that's Kurdish, and then they actually go into Iran. Northwest Iran is Kurdish, and so they cover the whole swath of land.
So here in the center of my screen, that's Erbil. That's sort of the, I guess, unofficial, at least when Iraq set up their government after we kind of made a mess of it over there. That's sort of the Iraqi Kurdish capital.
It's a de facto capital of Kurdish Iraq. I was there a few years ago and spent a month there, and it was very, very enlightening. So it gave me a feel for what it's actually like on the ground there.
And it's an oil-rich area too, isn't it?
Oh yeah. In Erbil, I was there in the summer, and the temperatures were up like 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and everything stunk of oil everywhere you went. Yeah, there's oil everywhere.
It's sort of like the town that's the paper mill. When it smells like stale urine, that's the smell of full employment in town.
But what was interesting to me was being exposed there. The Kurds and Israel are very, very close. Now, this is a very curious thing because the Kurds are Muslim, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to think that if you're Muslim, you're anti-Israel, but not so with the Kurds. And I met with several Kurdish officials when I was in Erbil in Kurdish Iraq back in 2019. And I asked one, I said, how is it that the Kurds are so warm, and Israel and the Kurds are so warm toward one another? When most Muslim countries deal with more of an anti-Israel narrative coming out of Islam. And he said, here's why. He said, if you're a Kurd, your primary identity is not Islam. Your primary identity as a person is that you are Kurdish. And if someone comes along and respects you and helps you and is on you, then they're a friend. I thought that was very interesting because although they are Muslim, they are Israel's closest allies in the Middle East. And because of the territory they cover, because they're in Turkey, they're in Syria, they're in Iraq, and they are in Iran, I am guessing, and I think it's a pretty good guess, that Israel has developed an intelligence network using the Kurds, with the Kurds in these areas. I think there are a lot of very interesting spy stories that we may never hear that involve Israel and the Kurds.
It sounds like there's some historical fact-based spy novels that could be written about the area.
Oh, absolutely. And hopefully they will be.
And I don't think we understand. So on the right of the screen, there's a circular town, city, that's Erbil. And on the left, over here on the Tigris River, you see Mosul, which is the site of ancient Nineveh. And that was, ISIS was deeply embedded in there. And our friend Seth Fransman's written, I think, a large part of his book, what was the title, After ISIS, that he wrote?
Yes.
He talked about the counterinsurgency that the American army had to go into Mosul, which is a densely populated area, much like parts of Gaza. And I think a lot of the lessons from Mosul were translated to the Israeli Defense Forces in their attack on Gaza. That's just my my guess. So I want to talk about this. So this is just, I mean, this whole thing is just stunning that this went down. Syria went down in 3 days.
Yeah.
And it's clear that these rebel groups, which are no good guys that I can see, I think they're sort of putting on a show right now because they're trying to get their bearings about. I think they went faster than they ever thought that they would too, and they're sort of like.
Also, I've got to hand it to Mohammed al-Julani. He's the leader of this HTS group.
Right.
He has done a remarkable job building alliances with these various tribal groups. He's meeting with them. He's smooth. He's offering peace. He's saying we want to work together. We want, so he's selling his narrative, as a reformed. He was a member
ISIS, Al Qaeda, Al Nusra.
He's a member of Al Qaeda, and he supposedly is reformed from that. But his organization HTS is still a jihadist organization, classified as a terror group. So they're saying all nice and good things right now, including, we want to get along with Israel. We don't want to have a problem with Israel. So, but Israel is, as you know, it's really interesting. Israel has been bombing the heck out of Syria ever since HTS took over. Not bombing HTS, but they've been taking out all of the weapons, depots, military, airfield sites. And the other day, they took out the entire Syrian Navy and didn't even really make the news. But the whole
that was an attack here at Tartus, where Russia had a military base. And my understanding is they're at Tartus and up the Mediterranean coast a little bit at Latakia, where, let's see, there's still 2 red areas in Syria on this map. I don't know how effective they are, but my understanding, Brian, is that Russia is struggling to figure out the logistics of how they get their stuff out of Syria.
Well, in fact, there's a link. I don't know if you got it. You probably didn't get a chance to see it. I sent it before we started talking. That is a satellite photo of Russian sites on the coast here, packed with equipment, clearly preparing to abandon the sites. So at least it looks that way. So Russia has been moving out post-haste. Russia has been moving out. All these developments are actually mind-boggling when we look back and consider how things look back in 2015, 2017, certainly.
Right. So I'm going to pull that up while we're talking here, and if you'll just give me a second here.
There's a great resource if you want to keep up with news that is ahead of what you'll see in mainstream news sources, even in Israel. There's a site, a channel on a chat application called Telegram. And the channel is Abu Ali Express in English.
Yeah, I follow it as well.
And Abu Ali Express has, the guy running it is amazing because he does this in English and in Hebrew. And he puts up videos and commentary, and as things are breaking, if you want to see what's actually happening in the present, Abu Ali Express is a great place to go.
So these photos, I think I have them up, don't I?
Right now.
No, they don't. I've still got that map. Hang on a second here. This is my production team's not doing very well this morning. Let's see, share screen. And
so what's that biblical passage about the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing?
Okay, there we go. So this is I think one of the links that you sent me.
That's what I sent you, right?
And so you see, this is the Russian port at Tartus, the big picture at the top, and then these smaller pictures down here are. I'm pretty sure that this one, that's the air base at near Latakia, Kemeny Air Base or whatever it's called, and then there's another one where excuse me. How do these guys? This satellite stuff is And you can see they've got all this stuff there. And then there were pictures of giant cargo planes the other day with the nose cones open.
Right.
But Russia's got a logistical issue because they're kind of tied up in Ukraine.
Right.
And it's a crazy situation. So I'm going to go back to my map here in just a second. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Golan, because I know that, as you know, you spend a lot of time up there. And so let me pull up my map. Share
While
screen.
you're pulling it up, it's also important to keep in mind that things are getting very heated right now in Judea and Samaria in the Palestinian territories. There's a lot of Hamas activity. Hamas is trying to ignite Palestinian factions inside the Palestinian territories against the Palestinian Authority. And
Okay.
so
Are those would those be sort of in Jenin or?
Jenin is obviously, Jenin is the biggest hotspot there.
Way up at the north here in Samaria. I like this term Samaria instead. Of course, Nablus is here in the middle. Right. You're down here. But this is, I think, who I've interviewed so many people. Jonathan Felstein, I think he lives in a fraud, and he says, there's no fence between me and that mosque that I can see off my back deck here.
Right.
And they used to, well, you live in the area, a lot of we'll call them Palestinians, used to work in Israel, in Israeli homes. Is anybody employing them anymore?
It's actually very difficult in the Bethlehem area, where a lot of Palestinians actually did, before October 7, 2023, they were every day going across with work permits to work in Israel. And since October 7, most of them have not been able to get work. And that is, it's difficult because it certainly contributes to a huge economic crisis inside the Palestinian territories, which is not good for Israel, because where you have poverty and people can't eat and they don't work, it tends to foment extremism. And at the same time, of course, tourism has fallen off a cliff, not only in Israel, but in especially a city like Bethlehem, where a lot of tourists come to see the Church of the Nativity, where Jesus was born.
Yeah, so let me, so I have the Golan Heights up. This is the blue area.
Right.
And down through the Golan, I don't know if I can highlight this and it shows up. No, it doesn't show up. But there's like a blue line down through the middle of the Golan Heights, kind of a zigzag line. Right. And it's sort of like a black line next to a black line. So that's up around Kenitra and not too far from Katsrin, where you go. There was a no man's land, right?
Right. Established by the UN back in 1973 after the Yom Kippur War.
And so I don't want to talk too much because everybody says, "Wouldn't you just let your guests talk?" and everything.
This is fun.
And I said, I always say we're having a conversation. So, and Brian, I went there the first time about 30 years ago, my first trip to Israel. And I remember going up to the Golan Heights, and I knew about the 67 war. I'd studied it. I knew about the Yom Kippur War in 73. And my reaction to the Golan Heights was, this is the most militarily strategic piece of property I have ever seen in my life, I will ever see in my life. And Israel can never, ever give this back.
No, they can't. No.
And so, that was one of the things that we liked about Trump, that he put in a proclamation that Israel
is part of
the Golan Heights. It's part of Israel.
Right.
And so tell us what's happened since the Syrian war, because there's a lot going on just in the Golan region.
As soon as HTS took over in Syria, Israel moved. I mean, it's really remarkable how quickly they moved. They began bombing all these military sites, all these weapons cache sites, the Navy, but they also moved their troops up to the line. They began to build a barrier, and they sent troops over into that no man's land to the right of the blue line in Syria, including the site on Mount Hermon, the mountain of Israel, which is in Syria. And so that land now, Israel is in that area, all the way from north, all along the border there. And of course, they're getting all kinds of criticism. Everybody's saying, "Oh, you're there to invade."
Right.
It's an opportunistic expansionism, they call it. But the only reason Israel is there is to ensure that what happened with Hezbollah and Lebanon being literally on their border will never happen in Syria. And because they like what they hear HTS saying, but they don't trust it, they know they have to, they're doing everything they can to make that area secure right now. It's an area, and also it's a buffer zone established by the UN, UNDOF, UNDOF. I can't remember what that stands for. I did a report about it just recently, this last Sunday. By the way, I do weekly reports for a group called Tipping Point, and on the website endtimes.com. endtimes.com. So if you want to see reports that I've been doing, I do every week, go to the website endtimes.com. In any case, they are there strictly to make sure that a new terror organization or group does not establish itself directly on its border like Hezbollah did. It was a hard lesson Israel learned, but it's not going to let that happen again.
So now talk about this interesting situation with the Druze villages in Syria.
Yeah. The Druze, a number of Druze villages in southern Syria have said, we want to be part of Israel. Please let us be part of Israel. We'd rather be with you than with these people coming in.
Now, are these villages, am I right in the geography? So here we see the Sea of Galilee right on the left of the screen, and then you go across the Golan Heights, and you see that's the Jordan border there with the squiggly right Jordan River and everything there. And then you have this section of Syria where that comes down to the Jordan border, and it's sort of a triangle where Israel, Jordan, and Syria join together. And there's a lot of Druze that live in this area. Is that where the villages are, or are they up there near Majel Shams?
I can't say absolutely, but I'm pretty sure that's where they are.
Okay. And then if you also look here, if you go down a little bit from this point of, you go to the Sea of Galilee, go down to the right, you see a town called Dara.
Right.
And that's, by the way, I think I told you, well, you know this, I was in Israel in 2011, staying at a resort right here on the south end of the Sea of Galilee. And the morning we get up that morning and they say, hey, there's riots going on in Dara. And that was the start of the Syrian civil war in March of 2011. So I was like, it was this beautiful day. The Sea of Galilee was like glass, and 30 miles away in Dara, only 30 miles away, all hell was breaking loose. And 13 years have gone by with this. And by the way, there's a significant, to the east of Dara in southern Syria, there's also many Druze. And I don't think, and these are, I don't know, I think Danny Seaman told me yesterday that the Druze may total 6 million people in total.
You mean everywhere?
Yeah, if you take all the Druze groups, the number seemed a little bit high to me, but I know that the Kurds, they're what, 20 or 30 million people?
Oh yeah, they're a big people group.
I mean, it's the largest, I've heard, it's the largest ethnic group in the world without their own country.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So the Druze, this is kind of interesting because they're a different religious group. I guess I would say monotheistic, but maybe not quite the way we would think, but they also believe in reincarnation.
Yeah, their beliefs are secret. They're kind of a Gnostic group, and you only get to know the secrets of what they believe if you are in the inside and have been there. I don't know.
Okay.
But I can tell you, in Israel, the Druzim are very, very highly regarded. Some of Israel's best military and diplomatic personnel are Druzim.
And they're not required by law to serve in the IDF, but they do volunteer.
They fight and they die. They shed their blood for this country.
But this is kind of an interesting phenomenon because, when I've been there, they always say, well, there's Majel Shams is a Druze town in the farthest north in Israel, right at the base of Mount Hermon. And they said that, the problem with the 6-Day War and the 73 War is that the Druze villages and families were divided ever since.
Right.
But now the Druze, at least in a number of villages, and the number seems to be growing, are saying, hey, we don't want to be part of a Syria governed by this jihadi group.
Right.
We want to be part of Israel.
Right.
And what's the reaction within Israel? First of all, let me ask you this. Israel's not marching on Damascus, are they?
No.
Okay.
No, there have been, certainly not. There have been, it appears, there have been military operations that have gone farther into Syria than the buffer zone. But all operations, whether it's bombing or personnel on the ground, has only been to take out assets, military assets, that were held by the former Bashar Assad regime. That's what they've been doing. Chemical weapons, other kinds of weapons, airfields, drones, planes, and of course in ships in the ocean. So they have bombed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sites just in the last few days, last week.
And Iran is gone, or they with.
Yeah, they're out of the picture. Khamenei right now, even today, is rattling his saying, we're going to come back and this and yada yada. But yeah, they're out of the picture right now, and it's interesting. Everybody right now is trying to make nice and establish some kind of relationship with HTS, with al-Julani's group that has taken over most of Syria. Qatar is trying to apparently is opening its embassy there. Who else? Maybe Saudi Arabia and Iran. Yeah. Iran in its press, even today, is saying, we are reaching out. Of course they are.
But this is tectonic because, Iran estimates had spent $30 to $50 billion establishing itself in Syria and another similar amount in Lebanon with Hezbollah, and that's sort of all evaporated.
It's gone. And in fact, that one report here said that Iran is now a cornered rat. And that means it's very, 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 very dangerous right now. And this is perhaps the most important thing we're talking about today in terms of Israel, is that it seems, at least to me, that there's no question Iran is racing to build a nuclear weapon. Their only way back, their only way to save face, their only way to regain prestige and honor in this part of the world is to become a nuclear state. And they have, last week there was a report in a publication called Israel Defense, and it said that according to U.S. sources, Iran today has enough fissile material to build 12 nuclear bombs.
Brian, in the last couple minutes here, we could go for hours easily as we have in the past. But how can Christians in America, how should we be dealing with what's going on in the Middle East? Politically, we have a new president theoretically coming into office in a few weeks. And who knows what he's going to do? If he's listening to the Tucker Carlsons of the world, he's not going to do anything. If he's listening to others, they're going to say, the fight against Iran is our fight too. And we've got to watch these jihadis in Syria. I mean, what are Christians supposed to do in light of all of this, and how can we support Israel and that sort of thing?
I think the first thing is be on guard. Anti-Semitism is exploding around the world, and it is exploding, including inside evangelical communities. We live in a day and age, and I've heard you say this, where it is hard sometimes to discern what's true and what isn't true. Anti-Semitism, however, is the proverbial canary in the coal mine. If you are in a social, religious, any kind of context in which you're hearing things that you agree with, but then anti-Semitic sentiments come up, our guard needs to go up right away, right? And I think in many cases it means go someplace else, move. Consider the whole narrative of whatever the group is where you're hearing this anti-Semitic stuff. It is poison. It poisons the whole well, and it doesn't just come out of isolation. It is symptomatic of untruth, and there's spiritual warfare right now, and the enemy is hugely succeeding in his efforts to persuade the world that Jews are evil. It's coming back. The narrative is exploding in the West, in America, certainly in Europe, but also in America, is that Jews are the new Nazis. They are ruthlessly attempting to kill their enemies, slaughter their enemies, and take over the world economically. These are big red flags. If you hear these things from a politician, from a preacher, from a teacher, run. The other thing to do is stay in the Word. I mean, get to know why does God care about the Jewish people? Well, he chose them. They are his human family. You know, when Jesus said, if whatever you do to the least of my brethren, you do unto me, he was talking about his human family, his human Jewish family. He loves his human Jewish family. And if you marry somebody, you better know how to get along with your spouse's family. You marry into a family. We have married, as believers in Yeshua, we have married into the family of God, the human family of God, which is the Jewish people. And we really cannot know or understand who Jesus is, who he really is, without understanding his Jewishness, something that has been largely lost. So get in the Word, get to know Jewish people in your community, reach out, attend events, and with an open heart, and just love these people that God has chosen as his unique human family. And then the other thing is, I think we should not be surprised by a dramatic increase in spiritual attacks in our personal lives, in areas that other people don't see. And when these things happen, it's easy to believe we're the only ones, or I'm the only one this is happening to. But with just a little bit of exploration, you'll find it's happening to everybody. The enemy wants to knock us off our feet, and we have to keep by faith getting back up and fighting the good fight of faith. And I know that putting on the full armor of God has become almost a cliche, but it's something really we have to do every single day. Consciously, deliberately put on the armor of God. We cleanse ourselves with forgiveness, and we get back up, and we fight the good fight of faith. And if you remember in Ephesians 6, it says, "Do so praying at all times in the Spirit." Well, that's what I think we have to do these days. This is we are called to war. We are in a war.
I like that last part, especially the unpacking the
Jewish Paul, who wrote Ephesians and said, "The feet shod in the armor of God" passage, feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace.
Shalom.
Right. But when you unpack that, that's speaking about the reign of Messiah.
Right.
Coming.
Yes. And also it's not peace on earth, goodwill to men. When we hear that, it wasn't like peace between everybody. The shalom, the peace of God, is peace with him, right? He made it possible for us, for people to have peace with him. And so when we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, when we are praying for a reconciliation, a peace between Abba and his people, between Abba and us as individuals.
Interesting. Well, those are great thoughts. Brian, my friend, thank you. We'll have to do this a little bit more regularly than we have. Wars intrude, and I know that gets us going, and you have your own things that you're doing. And so follow Brian, endtimes.com, and look for his articles. They appear occasionally, different places. And Brian is very well informed. I know a lot of his friends are my friends, and he knows what he's talking about. So Brian, thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, John. You too. It was a lot of fun. God bless.